Pretty Woman was the quintessential Hollywood romance of 1990. Was a Cinderella tale about a rich businessman who develops feelings for a sex worker. It was directed by Gary Marshall and stars Julia Roberts, who was hardly recognized at the time, and Richard Gere. However, the story we witnessed on film was only half of it. The studio didn't want you to know about the 15 forbidden moments that took place behind the flawless smiles and sparkling outfits. There are covert bloopers, near misses, covert rewrites, and one startling scene that nearly destroyed the film's impact. Beneath the fairy tale, each of them relates a narrative. What actually transpired behind the camera, and what was the pivotal incident that permanently altered Pretty Woman? One of Pretty Woman's most carefree and happy scenes is the bathtub chaos. Vivian is bathing in a bubble bath while yelling "Princess kiss" aloud. The scene is carefree and lighthearted, giving the impression that Julia Roberts is actually inhabiting her role. But there was total anarchy beneath the laughs and bubbles. First of all, a typical bubble bath was not in Julia's bathtub. Under the harsh studio lights, the production team sought a foam that was exaggerated, movie perfect, and would remain puffy for hours. Their remedy? The type of detergent used for auto washing is industrial strength. After hours of filming, Robert's skin started to burn, even though the bubbles looked fantastic on camera. Even worse, her hair's red dye was completely removed by the strong soap. Her stylist discovered orange streaks in it the following morning. In order to re-dye her hair before filming resumed, the entire crew had to stop work. Then came the prank for which she was unprepared. Vivian must sing while submerging her head in the water during the sequence. Director Gary Marshall and the entire team exited the room at that point. Vivian discovered that everything had disappeared and that she was all alone when she got back up to resume shooting, leaving her to silently complete a scenario. Her face was truly shocked, and then she burst out laughing for several minutes. However, Roberts saw that laughing as an oxygen mask. All of the long hours of shooting, pressure, and physical anguish simply vanished for a little while there. What appeared to be light-hearted spontaneity turned out to be a colorful outburst driven by fatigue, soap burn, and the ideal environment for a good laugh. We fell in love with the vivacious Vivian, who was actually fighting to maintain her smile despite the pain. Hold on to your popcorn because what followed almost altered the course of Hollywood history. The sinister beginnings of Pretty Woman. There was a story that didn't believe in happy endings before the roses and the balcony from the fairy tale. J.F. To put it plainly, Lawton's initial script, which was titled $3,000, was not a romantic comedy. A week-long transaction in Los Angeles was the subject of this gloomy, neon-lit character study. Vivian, a desperate sex prostitute, is paid $3,000 by Edward, a vicious corporate raider. Just surviving, no rescue, no makeover montage. Vivian was neither brave nor enchanted by wealth. She was scarred, broken, raggedly edged, and fighting the kind of demons that studios shunned. Predation and addiction. Being invisible in a city that only sees money is a silent humiliation. In contrast, Edward was not a prince in a limousine. He was a man who evaluated people based on what could be taken away, just as he evaluated businesses. When $3,000 is involved, the week finishes with a thud rather than a swoon. He drops her off. She has nothing left but money. It's a harsh message. Transactions don't become romantic tales. Disney then took over. Sweetening the script is the easiest way to make them less harsh. They eventually made a special effort to completely re-engineer it. The directive was unambiguous. Keep the electricity and give up the nihilism. Vivian's weakness turned into wit. Edward's predation turned into an estrangement that needed to be thawed. The conclusion was created from the ground up, tested, adjusted, and then updated to fit the Cinderella code. He is saved by her. Back to you. The genre changed, but the city stayed the same. What started out as a warning about disposability and power evolved into the gold standard for glitzy wish fulfillment. This secret is, of course, Pretty Woman's Month. A terrifying fantasy that came to life. A dream that was also devoured by studio orders, transforming not only a movie for eternity but an entire decade in the romantic comedy genre. Julia Roberts was nearly supplanted. It is difficult to envision Pretty Woman without the radiant grin of Julia Roberts. However, Disney attempted to completely remove her from the image for a short, anxious moment. Executives were concerned that Roberts, who was only 21 at the time and not well known, was too raw for the studio's new fairy tale persona when they purchased the film's rights. She had been cast flawlessly in the original $3,000 version. A streetwise girl with real emotions and vulnerability. Disney, however, sought glitz, not grimness, in their sanitized version. The studio started looking for names that were safer. Michelle Pfeiffer, Daryl Hannah, and Meg Ryan were all mentioned as potential substitutes. According to one executive document, Julia Roberts is too passionate for this tone. She was out for a few nervous weeks. However, the film's director, Gary Marshall, was unyielding. During tryouts, he had witnessed her chemistry and her remarkable ability to make sorrow shine. He assured them she was the lifeblood. The movie ends when you remove her. For Roberts, it was a reinstatement. But the truth was that there was a lot of pressure by the time filming started. She shivered before each take, as crew members would later remember. Her worries were overwhelmed by the weight of carrying a studio movie that already made her feel powerful enough. She was so nervous before her first close-up that she was hardly able to control her hives. She needed to have her skin iced in between shots by makeup artists. But when the camera rolled, something occurred. Charm emerges from the anxiousness. The exact thing that made Pretty Woman unique was the terror that nearly overtook her character and the tremble in her voice that transformed into innocence. It wasn't just Vivian that Julia Roberts was portraying. When a prank made history, everyone recognized Vivian, the underappreciated woman, for who she truly was. The lavish hotel suite, Richard Gere's display of a glittering necklace, and Julia Roberts' contagious laughter as he clamps the box shut on her fingers are some of the most often re-watched movie scenes from the 1990s. It's impulsive, full of fun, and flawless. Here's the secret, though, that nobody was meant to know. The script didn't include any of it. The moment was not authorized, planned, or choreographed. Julia was having trouble establishing the appropriate tone during the rehearsal process. The atmosphere was rigid. It was compelled by the chemistry. Do something to surprise her, director Gary Marshall said to Gere. Gere abruptly snapped the case shut as Roberts leaned in to examine the necklace as the cameras rolled. Her laughs and gasp weren't fake. They were in complete shock. During the shoot, the crew heard it laughing. "Cut," Marshall yelled. "That's all. The take is that." The accidental burst of laughing has evolved into one of the most romantic gestures in film history. The best moments cannot be stage managed, as seen by this. However, there was something even more profound in laughter among that the audience never saw. The necklace itself, genuine jewelry, not a prop. Under the watchful eye of two armed guards who never took their eyes off it, the set received an item worth over $250,000 that was designed by Fred Jolia. Every time the box was held by Gere, a jeweler's salesperson would watch from a hawk-like crouch off camera. Production would have abruptly ceased if it had fallen. The flick moment in the box was intended to be a harmless joke, but it ended up becoming a very risky investment. The studio would have lost $250,000 with just one mistake. However, it ended up being Hollywood magic. A single unplanned moment in a sleek ideal became memorable, real, and human. The nervous star. On screen, Julia Roberts exuded assurance, but off camera, she was everything but composed. At the age of 21, she unexpectedly found herself in the lead role of a big-budget movie that had seen numerous revisions, recastings, and reshapings. It was simultaneously thrilling and horrifying for Roberts. She would begin to shake before almost every romantic or emotionally charged moment, according to crew workers. Her hands were shaking so badly that in order to stay steady, she needed to grip props with both of them. Later, a cosmetic artist acknowledged that they had to replace Julia's lipstick in between takes because her lips occasionally trembled excessively just before the shot. Although she was quite nervous, the true cause was pressure. The strain of shooting with Richard Gere, replacing actresses with more expertise, and having studio executives watch, who had previously attempted to fire her. Every word was tinged with the anxiety of losing her ideal role. It became so steamy in one of the first love scenes that the director had to cut it short. Roberts's heart beat so quickly that blood vessels could be seen protruding in her forehead. The ever-patient tutor of Gary Marshall approached, sat next to her on the bed, and simply began to converse. Jokes were told without direct communication. Reminding her to breathe and telling her humorous stories caused her to gradually relax. And something changed when the camera rolled once more. That apprehensive energy transformed into vulnerability, into the very tenderness that made Vivian so beloved by viewers. In reality, what appeared to be easy charm was the result of a young woman transforming her dread into something sincere. The smiles, the shuddering. There was no acting in the shy looks. In real time, Julia Roberts was discovering her courage. Richard Gere, the real one. Richard Gere didn't want anything to do with Pretty Woman before he turned into the dapper businessman who won Vivian over. He brushed the script aside when it initially came to him, thinking it was a weak fairy tale about a man who buys devotion. Gere didn't picture himself in a glitzy romantic comedy because he was already well known for his serious parts. Despite his repeated rejections, fate and Julia Roberts had other ideas. The two stars met informally at a New York hotel, thanks to director Gary Marshall's arrangement. Gere was kind but aloof, obviously prepared to say no once more. Roberts wrote something on a post-it note as the meeting came to an end. Grinned and passed it over the table. "Please say yes," it said. Later, Gere claimed to have felt something electric when he gazed into her eyes. He remembered, "I simply knew. We were magical." Shortly after, he gave Marshall a call and consented to work on the movie. It's almost secret to the fans that Gere had the potential to become the cultured, enigmatic man he was portraying. Being a longtime musician, he produced the melancholy piano piece the night before the movie was filmed and performed it personally in the hotel scene. There was no narrative for the music. It came straight from his intellect and heart. However, the message of the film did not sit well with Richards as the majority fainted. He later said that the story's exaltation of wealth and power made him uncomfortable. He went on to say that it was a daydream, but a lovely one. The exact thing that drove Edward Lewis to create was this paradox itself, the attractiveness encased in subdued anxiety. In addition to portraying the gentleman, Richard Gere also showed the real man behind the mask. The over-the-top battle scene. Pretty Woman takes a unique, abrupt turn at the end. Normally cool and collected, Edward Lewis loses his temper and hurls his cunning attorney, Philip Stuckey, into the wall. This is a time of catharsis. Edward's loss of control is the only instance we witness. However, that scene became far more realistic behind the camera than anyone had anticipated. The confrontation should feel unplanned and genuine, according to director Gary Marshall. He instructed Jason Alexander, who portrayed Stuckey, and Richard Gere to make up the argument. He advised against choreographing it. Allow it to occur. Nobody anticipated the take that came next. With real rage, Gere swung at Alexander, hitting him so hard into a prop table that one of the actors' crowns came loose. Everybody froze. It was briefly unclear if Alexander had actually injured himself or if he had just been staged the fall. The actor then clutched his lips as he erupted in laughter. He answered, "Well, that was so true." Marshall did not request another take despite the roaring of the crew. He'd received exactly what he desired. Unfiltered, the explosion showed that Edward was a person. The final version that the public will eventually view was that unprocessed footage. Outside of the set, Gere was appalled at the thought of hurting his co-star. He apologized profusely to Alexander, who dismissed it with ease and said that the incident had earned him the most costly dental visit in Hollywood. Celluloid gold was ultimately purchased by this inadvertent whack. It was a meticulously crafted duel that was ultimately just two performers acting on impulse. Then, the immediately painful expression turned into the movie's reality. Ironically, Pretty Woman's most honest scene was also its most violent. The perilous set secrets Pretty Woman set was anything but secure for a movie known for its glitzy allure and carefree romance. Scenes that could have gone horribly wrong were hidden behind those flawless Beverly Hills settings. For example, the driving sequences. The casual attitude is contagious when Vivian drives Edward's elegant Lotus. However, the public was unaware that Julia Roberts was not a competent driver. During rehearsals, she had brought it up, but Gary Marshall wanted it to be genuine. "We'll go slowly," he said. Rather, Hollywood Boulevard's winding streets became a maze. Roberts frequently stalled the vehicle, jumped curbs, and once almost ran over a parked limousine. Off-camera, crew members were discreetly positioned, prepared to take over in the event of an emergency. In its own way, the car has a narrative to tell. Due to concerns that the explicit themes would damage their individual brands, Porsche and Ferrari had declined to donate automobiles for the shoot. As they left, Lotus, a company that was then having trouble staying relevant and sold its silver as Spirit, was able to reopen. Lotus's global sales tripled as a result of Pretty Woman's success, therefore the risk paid off. In another case, several locations were shot without the required licenses during location shooting, and the setup was completed quickly as crews ran away before the police and onlookers arrived. "Half of our movie was shot while we were fleeing," Julia joked. Despite Rodeo Drive's glitzy exterior, the movie was shot guerrilla style and teetered on the verge of turmoil. But it managed to work somehow. Perilous, inventing, and experiencing the adrenaline propelled the attractive woman ahead. The film's glittering splendor wasn't created peacefully. Almost always it was carved out from between the rocks of danger. Hold on tight. Not only did what happened next break hearts, Disney's rules were broken. Hidden and deleted scenes. A far darker tragedy served as the foundation for the polished, endearing fantasy novel The Pretty Woman We Know. Not everything made it to the final edit, even if Disney's revision made the tone lighter. Scenes were filmed, edited, and then buried in silence. Too unvarnished, too grim, or just too genuine for the version the studio aimed to market. A sequence illustrating Vivian's addiction was one of the most eerie missed moments. She was a struggling addict who turned to drugs as an escape from the harshness of her surroundings in J.F. Lawton's original script. An early version of this was filmed by Julia Roberts, who was sitting by herself in her flat and counting crumpled cash next to a flickering television. Disney officials believed it slayed the magic, despite its potency. The video was discarded. Substituted by the now famous montage of the bubble bath, which gave Vivian a hopeful rather than broken appearance. After their week together, Edward icily told Vivian to go in another deleted scene. Realizing she is being paid to leave, Vivian returns to her tiny flat with the $3,000 in cash still in hand. There was a sad complete circle at the beginning of that story. But test audiences detested it. They desired salvation rather than down to earth. Disney immediately suppressed the video and insisted on a rewrite. Other minor incisions also disappeared. An lengthier dispute where Edward comes out as worse, and a different shopping scene where Vivian is more severely humiliated. Those adjustments were dubbed tone corrections by the studio. However, they overshadowed the truth for any crew members on set. The final traces of a narrative that Pretty Woman was never permitted to develop. The movie's forbidden heart is preserved by an untold reel that is buried deep within Disney's vaults behind every laugh and romantic moment. The controversy around the poster. Among the most iconic movie posters in Hollywood history is this one. Richard Gere in his crisp gray suit and Julia Roberts in a black mini dress and thigh-high boot are leaning playfully back to back. "She walked off the street into his life and stole his heart" is the tagline. However, viewers were unaware that the fantasy-selling image wasn't totally authentic. Actually, that isn't the body of Julia Roberts. The marketing team wanted the poster to be symmetrical and sleek when they started developing it. However, the real shoot's pictures didn't match their intended style. So they hired a professional body double, Donna Scoggins, to pretend to be Roberts. For the final picture, her stance, torso, and legs were used. Then, a smooth edit of Julia's happy face was applied. Even Richard Gere was not immune to digital surgery. In order to make him appear younger and to further contrast with Julia's red hair, his renowned silver hair was darkened in post-production. The end product was a poster that gave the impression of classic glitz but didn't resemble the two actors in real life. Only a few members of the design team were aware of it for many years. But when the reality was revealed, Scoggins acknowledged that those are my legs and body, just not my head. She clarified that it was marketing and not malevolent. For Roberts, however, it came to represent Hollywood's desire to manipulate every aspect of her appearance, including her silhouette. Although the attractive woman billboard depicted a picture-perfect vision, it also alluded to a much more profound reality. Sometimes a woman's image still belongs to someone else even while her name is on the marquee. The Battle of the Red Dress. The flowing red gown Julia Roberts dons for the opera in Pretty Woman is one of the most memorable movie costumes. Its empowerment, elegance, and metamorphosis all combined into one striking picture. Fans are unaware, however, that the red dress that typified Vivian Ward was hardly ever worn. The studio officials quickly resisted when costume designer Marilyn Van Straker showed them her initial sketches. Black was what they want. To them, a black gown represented refinement, safety, understatement, and Disney friendliness. Vance didn't agree. Red, she contended, would bring Vivian to life, whereas black would make her disappear. She claimed that now is the time when she will be her own woman. She must be the room's owner. The discussion descended into a week-long impasse. Both hues were used in screen tests, and Julia herself was conflicted. The black gown appeared lovely yet lifeless under the stage lights. In contrast to Gere's tuxedo, the red shined, beautiful and bold, a visual heartbeat. Ultimately, it was Vance, the entirely handmade red silk gown. Was created by Claudia to improve Roberts' motions. The light adorned each soft fold and curve of the fabric as the film camera moved along the stairs. Reports state that when the crew saw the garment on the monitors, they gasped. A persona as well as a scenario were defined by the dress. A woman who had previously been seen as disposable became a symbol of strength, beauty, and confidence. The designer produced something remarkable, despite the executive's desire for something secure. In addition to being stylish, the red dress was a sign of rebellion and one of the most iconic representations of contemporary Hollywood femininity. Audacious, unrepentant, and unavoidable. The secret of Julia's laughter. The laugh of Julia Roberts is so distinctive that it has become her hallmark. The vivid, unadulterated sound that gave a beautiful woman life. However, most fans are unaware that one of the most difficult aspects of the entire process was getting that laugh on camera. Roberts found it difficult to unwind in the lighter scenes because he was still relatively unknown and under continual pressure. She would tense up, fidget, and overthink in between takes, making her laughs sound brittle or forced. Gary Marshall, the director, was aware that her charm and sincerity were essential to the film. He informed the crew, "We don't have a movie if Julia doesn't laugh naturally." He therefore devised a trick. Vivian is seen waiting with a feather just out of sight while lounging on the bed while watching I Love Lucy. Roberts began to laugh when the cameras rolled, but not enough. Marshall suddenly began to tickle her foot. The room was instantly filled with an uncontrollably loud outburst of laughter. That is the actual unscripted take. Was the version that was used in the finished product? For numerous iterations, Marshall would repeat this after the cameras began to roll. Little jokes, surprises, or private moments meant just for her. He saw that Julia's sincerity came from spontaneity rather than guidance. Marshall tested her as a result. Disney's editors even noticed and started incorporating her pure laughter into other scenes, where warmth may be tied in with it. What appeared to be unplanned joyousness to the audience was actually determined magical manipulation. Every glistening giggle was the result of a director subtly guiding a young actor who was learning to yield. It was more than just acting, basically. One tickle at a time, Julia Roberts was asserting her joy. The nearly unsuccessful conclusion. Pretty Woman is defined by this particular moment. Like a contemporary knight, Edward was calling out to Vivian's balcony while standing upright in the back of a white limousine with roses in his hand. He utters the final phrase of their fairy tale as she leans in and smiles through her tears. After he scales and saves her, what happens? In response, Vivian immediately saves him. Excellent. Legendary. The world fell in love with that ending, but it was rare. The first script for $3,000 lacked a balcony, a rescue, and a promise of love. With a somber handshake and an envelope stuffed with cash, Edward drops Vivian down on the street. She sits on a bus, looks out the window blankly, and watches his automobile vanish. Silence and hopelessness mark the script's conclusion. It was sad, but it was realistic. However, the conclusion had changed a few times by the time Disney acquired the project. Ambivalent endings took the place of the tragedy in early manuscripts. Either Vivian was spotted heading off toward a new employment rather than a new love, or Edward was observed driving away and turning around. These all had terrible test results. Instead of skepticism, the crowds desired catharsis. Thus, one evening, filmmaker Gary Marshall rewrote the conclusion by himself in his office using an empty notepad. He saw a modern-day fairy tale in his mind. A man who seemed to have it all and then realized that he needed something that money couldn't provide. He pitched it to the cast the next morning. Robert sobbed on the set because she adored the conclusion. That spontaneous rewriting is now firmly established as one of the most well-liked conclusions in movie history. It began as a narrative about money and ultimately became a story about redemption. Instead of concluding a transaction, the line concluded a timeless tale of love. Before the ideal take, there is panic. Laughter was not the source of all Pretty Woman charm. A portion of it was due to pure perseverance. Despite her beauty on TV, Julia Roberts had a struggle that few people were aware of. Panic attacks that came on suddenly and without notice. The strain of carrying a multi-million-dollar production started to wear on the actors in the middle of the shoot. Members of the crew remembered times when Roberts would tremble, her hands gripping her chest shortly before action, her breathing shallow. Director Gary Marshall soon discovered that Julia's greatest challenge was worry rather than acting. To calm her, he started rearranging the entire filming schedule. To keep her grounded, lighter takes were used for scenes that required close-ups or emotional intensity. When Roberts froze midline in one crucial moment, Marshall didn't yell or cut. Rather, he took her hand, sat next to her, and murmured in a low voice, "We can wait." The day was altered by that stop. After resetting and taking a deep breath, Roberts gave one of the film's most poignant performances. Horror. Vulnerability is now the emotional center of the film rather than a weakness. The entire team came together in support of her after that, approaching each scene as a finely balanced act between protection and performance. With every take, trust became more important than perfection. During production, an unwritten rule was in effect: preserve Julia's peace of mind while preserving the movie. When things got too much for her, Disney executives, some of the most brutal micromanagers, were told to leave the set. Confidence began to blossom as the shooting ended with terror in its last throes. Audiences saw Julia's portrayal of Vivian's charm and vulnerability as more than just acting; it was her transformation of her fear into something painfully real. A woman battling for poise and victory was hidden below all the glitter and smiles. Get ready. The subsequent disclosure transformed the Hollywood risk into a worldwide calamity. The shockwave that shook the world. Disney was not prepared for the tsunami that would follow Pretty Woman's March 1990 premiere. It was intended to be a low-key romantic comedy, a test to see if viewers would accept a contemporary Cinderella tale. Rather, it redefined what Hollywood considered a love tale to be and became a worldwide phenomenon. For its time, the movie's $464 million global box office receipts were astounding. That was greater than the combined totals for Home Alone and Die Hard 2. Thanks to repeat viewings and word of mouth, it remained in theaters for months. Friends attended in groups, couples watched it on date evenings, and even cynics who wrote it off as nonsense couldn't help but be enthralled by its allure. The critics are now equally as awed as everyone else, praising Julia Roberts once more for her outstanding performance in America's New Sweetheart and The Next Big Thing. The actress challenged Demi Moore and Meryl Streep for the Golden Globe for Best Actress, breaking the previous record. And she accomplished all of this before becoming 23 years old, paving the path for her second Academy Award nomination. The aspiring star earned millions of dollars for each movie, making her the best-paid actress in Hollywood overnight. In other words, the film's shockwaves have not only struck American shores but have spread to nearly every region of Europe, Asia, and Latin America. In Japan, Vivian-clad fans waited in line outside theaters while holding crimson roses. Sales of the red gowns produced by the Italian design firms surged. The rules were altered by Pretty Woman, which made it necessary to die in order to enter the fiercely competitive field of romantic comedy. And that's the secret tale of Pretty Woman's 15 banned moments. The chaos, mishaps, and secrets that contributed to the charm of the film. What caught you off guard the most? Tell us in the comments section below. Please hit the bell icon, like, and subscribe if you like this in-depth look at Hollywood's hidden secrets so you don't miss anything else. Thank you for viewing, and stay put. You won't want to miss the following video that appears on your screen.